Hello, and welcome back to our podcast, The Boss Ravioli Queens. We are Boss Lady Amy,
Nicole Ravioli,
and Jasmine the Queen.
And we are three very real caregivers who decided we are going to spill all the ravioli on the ins and outs of working in healthcare.
This isn't your usual podcast. If you came here for health and beauty tips, you're gonna be disappointed because we are gonna get messy.
Every other week we will feature a different topic that dives into the not-so-talked-about, taboo, and just plain underbelly of healthcare. We will talk about what it's like being a caregiver outside of work and all of the struggles that come with it. Just trying to be normal, everyday people.
On that note, let's
get
messy. Warning, this podcast includes profane language, crude humor, mature subjects, and possible talk of bodily fluids. This may not be suitable for listeners under the age of 18. Episode 3, The Yellow Brick Road of Cognitive Disabilities versus Mental Illness.
So, cognitive disabilities versus mental illness. I guess we should probably explain the difference first.
We're doing podcasts.
Just picked up you saying podcast.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
We
gonna
work
explain
well
this
in
shit
chaotic environments.
So anyways, Amy, take the floor.
Okay. Okay, so the difference, I guess I'll say what a cognitive disability is first. So basically, a cognitive disability is essentially when there is something physically wrong with your brain. It could be, genetic. You could have something chromosomal. It could be a traumatic brain injury, also known as a TBI. Basically, just something that is physically different with your brain than the average person. And mental illness is a chemical thing. It's like something that's wrong with your brain chemically.
A chemical imbalance.
Yes, a chemical imbalance. So there might not be anything wrong with your brain physically, but it could be chemically. And then, of course, you have the people who have a cognitive disability, and then they also have mental illness on top of it.
That's a bitch. Oh, that's a bitch. So, now that we've talked about that, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Working with it. Working with it. I don't know why I said it. They're people. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I think...
But you know what we mean. Like, working with it can be very, very difficult because you never know what's gonna be different or how they're gonna feel from day to day.
Yeah. So I think we should kind of go into a little bit the most common cognitive disabilities that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Well, if you're working in behavioral, I would say the most common is autism, but there's so many different classifications on the spectrum. So what I'm talking about as far as autism goes are more so like the nonverbal, very easily triggered, like sound sensitive, overstimulated, and that causes them to have behaviors, and those behaviors can range anywhere from self-injurious, so like them banging their head on the floor, or like biting themselves. I've seen that, or hitting themselves in the chest.
Yep, that's a big one.
And then physically aggressive behaviors as well, so, and they can't control it, so there are a lot of people that are like, oh, I would totally swing back, and I'm like, how would you ever do that? Because they literally can't help it. Mm-hmm. They don't know that they're causing you harm, they just know that there's something wrong with them.
Right.
So anyways, physical behaviors, so like I have gotten punched, kicked, slapped, hair ripped out of my head, like it's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Raise your hand if you've ever gotten elbowed in the windpipe on your birthday. No, just me? Okay. I'll put my hand down now.
Raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimized by Regina George.
Yeah, I don't miss that. Been spit on.
Oh, I've been spit.
Yeah.
Spit is the thing I can't do. I can deal with vomit, I can deal with blood, I can deal with pee, I can deal with poop, not spit. I hate
so
spit.
Gross.
I hate it. And I don't know why.
Or like the people that you have that drool like all the time. And it's like excessive.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Like the ones where like they have to wear clothing protectors For those of you who don't know, we call that clothing protectors instead of bibs because we want to try and keep up
It's degrading.
dignity. So instead of calling them bibs, we call them clothing protectors, but they're essentially the same thing. And there are some people that drool so bad that eventually their clothing protectors get like
Soaked all the way
holes
through.
almost from just being used so much from the same spot being drooled in all the time. And it's so nasty. And it's so hard keeping up that face like, oh, don't worry about it, it's okay. Because sometimes they are embarrassed.
Yeah, sometimes they're very embarrassed.
But it's, ugh.
Okay, so we talked about autism. Just like the other slew of behavioral residents tend to consist of schizophrenics,
Yeah.
which usually comes with some sort of manic bipolar disorder as well, so that's really fun. And I'm missing like another big one, I feel like.
Well, yeah, bipolar. I would say the most common cognitive mental illness behavioral combination that we see is autism and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
They just, I don't know, they seem to go hand in hand. Um, Sometimes ADHD, that's less popular, at least in where we work, that we see, but
It's usually not as like severe of like a behavioral situation either, so
yeah. Another big one that we see is cerebral palsy, which is it it affects your brain, but it's more your
it's
body.
more physical than anything.
Yeah, I would say
But
it's
it
more
does
of like the
make
muscular aspect.
it does make the brain like a little slower. It's more like you have kind of like a certain like age mentality almost.
Right. And the one thing that I hate when doctors just slap on that unspecified cognitive delay. Like, okay, what does that mean?
Do you want to know what my favorite unspecified category is?
Oh
What's
God.
that?
Unspecified mood disorder.
Oh,
I hate that.
I hate
Like,
that.
you could be bipolar, you could have anxiety,
I
you could
know.
have depression. Like, what does that mean?
And then when you're taking care of them, you have to sit and guess at it. Be like,
Oh.
okay, what is this?
The only time it's helpful is when it's for PRNs because then you could give it out for a lot of different things. But as far as like diagnoses goes, that's really hard because then you have to play the guessing game.
Literally.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
Or like the worst one, you don't see it as much anymore, but sometimes they do still diagnose people with unspecified mental retardation.
Yep.
Like it's not as common, but we do see it sometimes.
Also, please don't get offended because that's the literal medical diagnosis
It is.
terminology. Like,
Yep.
we're not using that word in like a derogatory way at all.
Nope, that is truly some people's diagnosis still, which I don't agree with. Because there's so many other ways to say it.
So we kind of talked about dealing with behaviors at work. So I guess we could go to more of like the mental or the cognitive side now, like working with people with cognitive disabilities rather than mental illness.
I think the biggest difference with that is like mental illness for the most part, like they have some control over their actions, like unless they're so severe that like they just have no control over it. But like for the most part, they can usually be talked down if they're like escalated. But you know, with cognitive disabilities, like Nicole was saying, there's just you can't change that. I mean, it's literally in the way that they're like that's just how their brain works. So it's a lot of with cognitive disabilities it's a lot of redirecting, and with mental illness it's a lot of just talking down, being calm. So as I was saying before, Miss Ravioli here dropped her the eans. So basically the biggest difference with mental versus cognitive disabilities is just it's all in the approach And like I was saying, with cognitive disabilities, it's a lot of redirecting, just being really, really calm, just really watching what you say, how you say it, and
How
mental
you
illness.
present yourself or
Yes.
body language
Yep.
also.
That's a huge one. And then mental illness is a lot of just, yeah.
I feel
Same.
like
Yep. That's about it.
I feel like with the behavioral side too, like I know you guys basically pretty much said what I'm going to say, but it's all in the way you present yourself. Like if you're feeling anxious, they're going to pick up on that
Oh,
and they're
absolutely.
going to get anxious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So it's all basically like putting on a mask every single fucking day.
So when you
Literally.
and then you just forget who you are at that point.
Right. Well, and two, like I will say that that happens like when a really negative staff member leaves, and like I've had so many instances where they're gone, and then the residents will be like, "Oh, it's her first day gone.
Mhm.
Thank God." Like they pick up
Mhm.
on that
They
stuff.
do. They really, really do. And it can make it very hard too when somebody who like doesn't care does leave, like a staff member finally leaves, and then you're stuck there fixing all the
Like
mistakes.
literally picking up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and especially too, like if the staff was nice to the residents, but mean to like other staff members, they pick up on that stuff too.
Yeah, for
Like
sure.
they know what's
They
up.
listen, they learn.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people don't understand. Like it still goes back to like the cardinal rules that you first learn when you're a caregiver, but people forget that they do know what's going on. It doesn't matter if
Absolutely.
they've got a mental illness or a cognitive disability, like they pick up on so much and they hear everything you say, especially if you're like having a personal conversation in front of them. Like if you're talking about your personal life and how you and your boyfriend just broke up or you're getting a divorce or so and so did this to you, like Cindy is a bitch and I don't like her. Well, then if one of the residents really likes you, then that's going to make them act different towards Cindy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And
And it can almost be like the equivalent of like when you have a young child and how they pick up on everything you do at home.
right. Well, and that part of it kind of goes back to some residents just don't know how to form like appropriate relationships. And so they think, okay, my favorite staff member hates Cindy. That means I hate Cindy too, even though she's done nothing wrong to me.
Right.
I actually
Poor
once.
Cindy.
Poor Cindy.
She's a bitch.
So I actually did have a resident who thought that they were going to marry one of the staff.
Oh God.
It was so awful. Like he would be on her ass all day, every day. And she like finally got the balls basically to tell him that it wasn't gonna happen, and my god, the behaviors. Whoo boy.
I,
He was like great. Eloping is when they run away. Anyways, he was eloping all the time. He was like trying to beat the shit out of everybody all the time. Like it caused so many problems. And personally, I think they should have moved her out of that house as soon as he said anything about like marriage
Right.
or
Right. They
like
should have moved the staff member or even I
and
don't know,
actually
even the
well
resident
before
sometimes.
that too. Like well before it got to that point because it was very known that he had like this huge crush on her
Right.
too. So, yeah, fun times.
well, and also people have to understand that someone with that sort of disability, like, to them, that's normal. That's how they make those interpersonal relationships. That's how they like bond, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be very, very clear on your boundaries from the start. Like, for example, I have a resident who tells me all the time I'm their best friend. And I always say, no, I'm your staff. You are a resident. And every time they're always like, are you sure? Yes, I'm positive. Sometimes it might sound a little mean, but it's better to be clear right from the get go.
Mm-hmm. For
And then you
sure.
have those staff that give in and are like, sure, of course we're best friends. Like, that's gonna bite you later.
All right, so moving on. We're gonna talk about mental institutions.
Oh,
Woo!
fun.
Woo!
I have worked in a
I like to
mental
call them cracker
institution.
barrels.
Cracker barrels? Oh my god. So I've worked in a mental institution because I was a CNA for like 2.5 to 3 years, I think it was.
I think we have all kind of worked in one. I'm pretty sure.
I mean, I've never officially worked in a mental institution, but I have 1,000,001 mental residents. It's the same thing.
Basically, you just didn't have the same state regs that we did.
Exactly.
Oh man, institutions are something else.
Oh, difficult. Yes.
Admissions. So that's basically where people go when they are trigger warning. Trigger warning, we're going to talk about when people are suicidal. Because that's where they go. Grippy sock vacation. I've thought about taking one quite a few times.
Little menti bakey.
Can I have a good old fashioned menti bee? Also, people that are drunk also can get sent there for like, it can either be an overnight or a 72-hour hold, but
Should we explain a 72-hour hold?
oh yeah. So basically a 72-hour hold is non-negotiable. There's no leaving against medical advice. You are literally stuck there for 72 hours because you are either a danger to yourself or others. And that, I mean like immediate danger. So yeah, that's not fun to deal with, but I also feel really bad for people that end up like that. Like, I took care of a lot of them, and a lot of them had really, really sad stories.
So it's also important to note that a 72-hour hold does have to come from, like, the police. It's, like she said, it's not optional. It's also called being chaptered or a Chapter 51.
Oh, Chapter 51.
Not to be confused with Area 51.
Yeah, so since you both worked in mental institutions. God, maybe I've
Use
only
your
one.
intuition.
Intuitions, into two tins, into bootins.
Just lock me up.
Throw in a key.
Give me that nice white jacket.
Ooh, the bouncy walls, though.
Ugh.
Okay, but in the mental institution that I worked at, they didn't even have the fucking bouncy walls. It was literally gym mats that were, like, glued onto the walls. And I don't know how that really works, because those are pretty hard, too. Like, they don't do a whole lot of protecting your head.
Right.
So, story time. So,
Sound the alarms.
there was once a resident that I took care of on admissions, and he threatened to stab my coworker in the neck with a pen.
Oh.
Nice.
While we already had him in the padded room. So guess who got to go in 5-point restraints?
Nice.
Yeah.
Fun.
That is
now I have to
fine.
explain the regs on that. God
Yes.
dang it.
We did kind of touch on it on a previous podcast, but
Oh no, they're
can
like
go in
the
more
actual
depth.
like institution regs for being in
yeah,
5-point
it's a little bit
restraints.
different, yeah.
So basically you get this really fun shot in the booty that chills you the fuck out. And you have to stay in the 5-point restraints until you're calm, but we have to do like literally 5-minute checks. Make sure that the restraints are loose enough that they're not cutting off circulation, but you also can't slip them. And then I believe after an hour we actually have to let the person out of restraints as well. But obviously you're going to have like multiple people in there just in case they try something fucky. Which has happened.
Yeah, for sure.
I
don't miss it.
And you're literally like laying on a bed with restraints on both wrists, both ankles, and then one across like your chest or your midsection, depending.
And please keep in mind that this does not happen in other places that are not mental institutions. We're not just tying up grandma because we want to have a good time.
And most of the time they're not even restrained or anything unless they become a major danger.
Necessary.
Well, I mean, he literally said he was going to stab her in the neck, so.
Yeah, right.
He also. We had like those weighted tables and chairs, like the ones that you put like 50 or 150 pounds of sand in or whatever.
Oh, yeah,
He
yeah.
almost flipped the fucking table.
Wow.
Like, it was insane. Like, turned into Hulk out of nowhere. And it was over the stupidest shit. Literally, he was sitting by these two other patients, and they were kind of picking on the one person.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally just went over there and I was like, hey, if you guys can't have like a decent civil conversation without making someone feel like shit, then you need to separate.
Right.
So he got all pissed off about it because I had to go over there for a second time. And then my coworker had said something and he told her that he was going to stab her in the fucking neck.
Wow.
Nice.
Yep. Okay, moving on from story time because I've got a million stories and I don't want to talk about it anymore.
So I think one of the things that is important to talk about is the fact that when a person with cognitive disabilities who also has behaviors, when they get sent to a mental institution, it is usually the last resort. Like, we try so hard to keep them out of those places because it is an extra trigger for them, because they're different from the people with the mental illnesses. They literally cannot control what they are doing. And so sometimes it can be really dangerous sending a person, say, for example, with a traumatic brain injury to a mental institution.
Yeah, like we literally have to exhaust all options before that
Yeah,
happens.
it's literally the last option. And normally, when they do like placements and stuff for most people, mental illnesses or regardless, honestly, they try to put them in the least restrictive environment.
Yep.
And if it becomes too much of a problem, then they start getting into more restrictive options.
So I think now would be a good time to explain good old CPI.
Ugh. So, CPI is holds. And again, must be in the care plan. It has to be in the care plan that you are allowed to restrain these people. So the only one I really remember, honestly, is the basket hold. And I did not like that one because it can actually cut off the airway. And I don't really know how to explain what it looks like. Maybe we could include some
Maybe-
pictures or something.
I mean, maybe we can like we'll do like videos in the future on like how these holds work.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Would probably be a
Ooh,
good
yeah.
idea. We can always do that for you guys too.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
So we'll kind of like explain it a little bit or whatever, and then we'll probably end up doing videos or something about them.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably important to mention that you most of the time need two people for these holds. Most of the time, not all the time. Like they do teach you one person, but the one
That's-
person is more of like a dodge.
It's more of a dodge and run kind of thing, enough to get you away from that person who may be trying to hurt you.
Honestly, I remember being trained at the mental institution job, and one of my coworkers was like, "Yep, time to re-up on the Mickey Mouse horse shit," because they hardly ever work. Like you have to get them in the position for
Right.
them to be able to work.
Right.
So I think another important thing to note about CPI is that this is something that we are trained on to only protect ourselves and other residents and not cause any harm to the person. Like, you are specifically trained on how to, I guess, make sure everyone is safe
Are
and
you
not...
plugging your nose?
What?
You sounded like you were holding
No,
your nose.
I was itching my nose. I was going like this.
I'm sorry, continue.
So yeah, well, that's all I really had to say, is that, like, the purpose of it is not to just be like, hey, let's go and wrestle. Like, it's not our goal to just be
Boss
like,
Lady Amy's on the top ropes.
it's not my goal to just be like, you know what, I really want to hold down a resident today.
Right.
Like, that is not what CPI is about. Also, I've heard it stand for different things. I've always been taught that it's crisis prevention intervention, But I've also heard that it stands for different things, like caregiver protection, intervention.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's all the same thing, though. It's basically just how to protect yourself and other residents while holding the resident in a safe place, essentially.
And also, there's another set of holds. It's called MANT, which is, I was taught for another place that I worked. They're supposed to be safer than CPI holds, I guess. But I don't really know technically if they are safer or not. But that's just what we were taught, I guess.
And also, too, like, this doesn't happen on a day-to-day. Like, this is not a thing that we're just, like, doing all the time. Happens maybe, like, once every, 6 months? Like,
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's rare.
it's very rare.
Unless you work in a mental institution on admissions.
Yeah, then
Yeah,
you're going to be
unless-
dealing with this a
yeah.
lot. But where we work, that's not the case. And if we have someone that is so high behavioral, they're getting a 30-day anyway.
Right.
Now you gotta explain a 30-day.
God damn it! So a 30-day is something that we issue to a resident's care team, which we already explained, right? I think we explained that.
Care teams, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, payer sources, whatever. So basically they help with finding placement. So you would issue that 30-day to the care team. Then that would be them trying to find a new place for that resident to go. But the thing with 30 days is that they're not actually 30 days.
It is not concrete.
And so no, like, no one's ever, like, getting kicked out on the street unless, like, it's a situation where they're so unsafe that we, like, call 911 or whatever and they go out and then they never come back. Which does happen. It's rare, but it does happen. But most of the time when you issue a 30-day, that person cannot leave until they have, like, new appropriate housing set up. So sometimes a person can literally get a 30-day and still be there for the next year until their care team has found them somewhere else to go.
Mm-hmm.
I so badly wanted to say the name.
Dub-dub!
Please excuse that. We're kind of filming this from my car and my phone's hooked up to it. So wubba lubba dub dub, everybody. Anyways.
I thought we talked about this silencing your phone.
It doesn't work. It's hooked up to my car.
Excuses.
Oh, anyways, I
The
think
joys of poverty.
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 So, anyways, next topic.
Oh, good Lord. All right, so we did touch a little bit about how behaviors are not one size fits all. There are plenty of people who can have the same cognitive disability or mental illness or both that,
Are triggered differently.
yep, are triggered differently and have different behaviors. And like we were talking about autism before, we take care of a lot of people with autism who are very, like, they have it really, really bad. But there's a lot of people that have autism and they function just fine and they can live on their own. And that's why, the people we take care of end up in the homes that we serve, because they're so severely affected by their disability that they just can't function like other people.
And also, fucking props to the people with autism that are high functioning, like can live out in society, because they still have triggers.
Mm-hmm.
But they
Absolutely.
they
It
learn
takes a
how to
lot of-
manage them, and
yeah.
it takes so much effort and
Mhm.
like time to be able to master
And
that.
even a lot of those people may have been in homes before because they didn't know how to manage it.
Yep.
And then they get to the point where they are able to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So I'm just going to go ahead and touch on the subject of the ISP and BSPs, which we did kind of cover a little bit in our first episode. So if you want to go back and listen to that. But the ISPs and BSPs, especially for behavioral people, is definitely very, very important to really look through. Because it is really, really going to tell you what you need to know about these people and what's the best way to keep them from getting all those triggers and having all those behaviors.
and how to redirect them if they do have those behaviors.
Yes, for
Because,
sure.
oh my God, that is so important. Like, knowing how, and it's not going to work for everybody. Like, you find
No.
you find your own niche with everybody, but it's definitely a really great set of guidelines as a starting point to figure out what works best for that person and you.
And it's gonna change. Like, something that used to work for somebody might not work months and months down the line. So that's why the ISPs and DSPs are like always constantly updated.
Okay, but can we talk about, like, the places that we've worked that didn't update BSPs and ISPs? Because holy fucking shit.
Do you want my list?
Oh, it was so frustrating. Like, if the manager of whatever home you're working for or whatever facility you're working for doesn't keep up to date on those, it is detrimental. Like, oh, I literally could have died. Literally could have died. Multiple times, actually. So, and I
Sips
know,
coffee judgingly.
I know that it sounds like I'm being dramatic, but I literally
You're not
got,
supposed to say the line.
but I literally got pushed in front of a semi on the highway on 2 separate occasions.
Nice.
2 separate occasions, and it all could have been avoided with proper BSP updating. Like,
Literally.
oh,
Well, it's the same as like medications. You know, sometimes people just grow tolerant of medications. It's the same for redirections. Like sometimes something just stops working and you have to try something new.
Right.
So yeah, and like he said before, we did touch on that a lot in our previous episode. So I think we're going to go ahead and move on. So another really fun one is what we are trained to do when 2 residents have an altercation.
oh.
Oh boy.
Or should I say, not trained on.
Basically.
Not trained on, absolutely.
So, Caregiving 101, when they teach you about resident altercations, it's drilled into our heads, never get in between them if they are physically fighting. And anyone who is a decent caregiver is going to feel really torn on this because they want to help the residents and break up the fight and make sure everyone's safe. But at the same time, you also don't want to get the shit beat out of you because then what good are you to the clients?
Right.
So it's honestly, they tell you not to do it, but I mean, it's kind of one of those situations where it's very circumstantial. You just need to kind of figure out your best move.
It's almost kind of personal judgment at that point.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
like if you think you can break it up without anybody getting physically hurt and stuff or whatever, then I guess go for it. But
or like catching it before it even happens, like separating the residents
Yes.
before it even gets
like if
to
you
that
know
point.
it's gonna turn into an altercation, just pick a resident and see if you can get them redirected before anything goes further than that.
Or
Right.
if like your coworker is cool with it, take them on a one-on-one outing in the community.
Yeah.
Like go drive somewhere,
Yeah.
spend some time.
Yeah, spend some
And
time
calm them
away
down.
so they can be separated.
And it depends on how close they are too. Like I've definitely gotten in the middle of fights before where someone's like 3 feet away from me on one side and someone's 3 feet away from me on the other side and I'm in the middle. And that's fine because I know the people, I know they're not going to lunge at me. They might lunge at each other. But if I'm in the middle, they won't do that. So you have to know your residents as well. But I mean, if they're like up close and personal, you know, punching each other in the face, that's a situation where it's better to just make sure all the other residents are safe, make sure everyone's in the room, and if you have to, call 911.
Right.
And also make sure that someone has eyes on the situations at all times.
Right.
Yeah, so because you have to document everything that happened.
Incident reports. Oh, my favorite. Not. Worst thing in my fucking life. At least they're computerized now, though.
Yeah.
Writing that shit
At some
out.
places.
At some places. But writing that shit out. Dude, I once had to write like a 4-page incident report. And I mean write it out. Like, not type it, write it. And it was like...
Like writing an essay for high school.
It
oh,
is.
so bad.
And with incident reports, you have to write what happened before, during, and after the altercation.
And who all witnessed it, including any other residents that may have been around that witnessed it.
Yep, and
Yep.
depending on how intense it was, sometimes you have to get an actual resident statement.
And then if the police involved, you have to get that statement also.
Yup.
Yup.
And you have to say, oh, where was staff? Could this have been prevented? How was it resolved? Did you attempt to redirect?
Mm-hmm.
All of those things.
And
And then
then-
what attempts at redirection you made
And then
also.
after you have all that done, then that means you have to contact family members and care teams and supervisors, because everybody needs to be aware of the situation that happens. So you have a whole team of people working on how to resolve it so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, so we should go into that a little bit. So anytime there's any sort of incident, fighting, fall, behavior, whatever, you have to have all of the contacting, at least to your supervisor, the guardian, and the incident report written before the end of your shift. And then you, as the supervisor, have to report that within 24 hours to the care team. But a lot of the times it happens much quicker than that, especially if the situation got really, really escalated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, with emails and everything, they'll get it when they come in.
Right.
And that's only if they don't answer their phone, though.
Yeah.
Right. And the nice thing about that, at least with emailing the care teams, is you don't have to double back and send them the incident report and then also send them a written email of what happened. You can either just upload the incident report and send that, or you could just do a quick little recap of the incident. And then email is always the best way to go when you're communicating with anybody who's on that person's team, because it's a written form of documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, y'all, we forgot that you have to do multiple incident reports because there's different residents involved.
Yep.
Yep. So
You
it'd
always
be
have
more
to do
than one
one
because
for the resident and then the other one.
Yep. They will both get one.
And it's really fun because the resident that you're writing the report on, you can use their name. It's fine. But the
other
other
one you
resident has
cannot.
to be identified as like peer or
Consumer or
Consumer
client.
or
yeah,
client.
it's just
The only time you can use initials of the other resident is when, like, the care team has both of those people on their caseload. But the poopy part about that is sometimes when you're sending out the emails, and so if you have email communication with the guardians, you have to send two different versions of it because the care team knows who you're talking about, but the guardians might not.
Yeah, and then if you use their name and send it to a care team that only works with one client, then it's a HIPAA violation.
Exactly.
oh, the fun things.
So
Okay.
that's a little bit more administrative. The average caregiver isn't going to have to worry about that part. They're just going to have to worry about reporting it to their supervisor. But we all know this because we have all been in management and we've all had to do this.
So I feel like now's a good time to move on from this before we go off on another tangent.
I agree. So I think the last thing that we're going to talk about before we wrap this episode up is basically the fact that we're told not to put ourselves in harm's way, but yet we're expected to basically give our entire lives to this job. Like,
Basically.
how can you do that? That's why so many caregivers feel so torn in this job.
A lot of times they don't necessarily ask us to, like, give our whole lives or whatever, but, like...
It's implied.
But it's implied, and depending on who your manager is and stuff or whatever, it's almost expected.
Yeah, absolutely. They will never come right out and say it, but it's kind of those, beating around the bush sort of ways that they say things that just make you pick up on that.
Or they like to try to guilt trip you.
Yep, it's like an unspoken rule almost. Especially being in management, like, if there's like a no call no show or someone is sick and can't come in, and they even with notice, like if you're working somewhere else, you can't clone yourself, so then you have to try and find coverage, or like the worst thing possible happens and someone gets stuck on a shift, and if they're already working a 16, that turns into a 24.
Yep.
Why haven't you figured out cloning technology yet? God damn it.
I don't know, let's talk.
It'd be so convenient.
You know what,
I
let's-
can just run a facility by myself.
Let's talk to the people that tried to clone the sheep. Because they
Get
were
a
on
move
to
on it,
something.
bitches.
They were on to something.
They were.
Ugh.
Bring that shit over to healthcare. Stat.
So, Yeah, like the shittiest part of that is the 24-hour thing, obviously, but the other shitty part is that if you're the manager and you can cover it, you have to.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go in. You literally have to drop whatever you're doing. Like, if you're supposed to be on a day off and it's not PTO, oh well, no more day off for you.
Sucks to suck.
Especially, too, like, if you get a call that, someone fell or they're going to the hospital or whatever, like, sorry, even if you're not working, you still have to come in now, especially if the caregiver is new or if they don't know how to deal with those behaviors. You're going to get those panic phone calls and you're like, okay, I'll be right there.
But I think before we get too long or whatever, we might start wrapping up this episode.
I think so. By all means, if you, as usual, if you guys have any questions, we're gonna have those socials linked. So if you want to comment and ask questions, we can probably do an episode literally where we just do Q&As.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, I think we need to do some AMA style episodes for sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, this wraps up episode 3.
Until next time.
Go wash your ass.
Bye!
Bye.
This has been the Boss Ravioli Queens podcast with your hosts, Boss Lady Amy,
Nicole Ravioli.
And Jasmine the Queen.
Thank you so much for spilling your ravioli with us.
Don't worry, we'll serve you more next time.